There is a poignancy in the lasting impact of Eddie Van Halen's music. When he was at his strongest, he was unstoppable, and many people had to watch out for him. The incredible stage presence of Van and his band attracted millions of fans who followed their careers as rock stars. There were as many occurrences in his personal life as maintaining employment despite his struggles with monsters and drugs. A friend named Valerie Bertinelli was there for him even though he was sad. Even though it has been a long time since his death, his wife Valerie has finally spoken out. Her words were, "To gain a better understanding of her recent statement, you should view this film." I would like to begin by discussing Eddie Van. According to Halen's wife, we should return to her husband's job. Eddie Van Halen's biography, the Pasadena, California-based hard rock band Van Halen, started out as a solo artist. Their initial release year was 1972. This band has been at the forefront of the hard rock era. Its mesmerizing performance on stage and the incredible guitar work of Eddie Van Halen elevated them to the status of a legendary rock band. In 2007, they were feted with an induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. To a band that made such an impact in the music industry, this is a tremendous honor. From 1-974-1985. When Van Halen was first formed, Eddie and Alex Van Halen played guitar and drums, lead singer David Lee Roth was on vocals, and bassist Michael Anthony was on drums. A fresh and encouraging tone emerged from them. Their albums and live performances revolved around relationships. A year ago, they released their debut album, In California, Van Halen, and it quickly peaked at number 19 on the Billboard 200, not long after its release. This was still significant, though, because the album eventually sold more than 10 million copies in the US, earning it diamond rank from the RIAA. Their star continued to rise over the subsequent 4 years, from 1979 to 1982. New singles, Van Halen 2, Women and Children First, Fair Warning, and Diver Down, were distributed. There was a meteoric rise to the top of the charts for all 4 of these albums. When the 1980s rolled around, Van Halen was still among America's most beloved rock bands. After that, 1984 came out, and Van Halen became even more famous and successful. The album featured the smash hit Jump, the band's sole Billboard Hot 100 #1 single. The album peaked at number 1 on the charts with its multiple hit singles, and 10 million copy sales cemented its place in 1980s rock. During his teenage years, Eddie Van Halen developed a profound affection for rock music. British bands such as the Beatles, the Dave Clark Five, and many more were huge influences on him and other children his age, in addition to the Rolling Stones. He taught himself music theory and composition, and he and his brother Alex quickly began performing and recording original music. Difficult times plagued Eddie's youth. His parents are from Indonesia and the Netherlands. He was born there. The family emigrated to the US in the early 60s to escape the racism they faced as a mixed-race family. When Eddie and Alex were in the United States, they began to put the pieces together for the band Van Halen. Because Eddie refused to give up, the Van Halen saga essentially concludes in the late 70s and early 80s, when Eddie is the biggest star in rock. Creative and dynamic musician and composer, his ability to experiment with guitar in ways that were previously unimaginable in rock music made him a true trailblazer. Although the band's studio album output dwindled after 2012, they maintained their profile through occasional reunion concerts. Now that he's dead, how did he gain fame, and what does his wife think of him? To find out, come back. Eddie and Alex Van Halen, makers of Van Halen and other collaborative works, were born in Amsterdam but relocated to Pasadena, California in 1962, offspring of parents from the Netherlands and Indonesia. The first time Eddie demonstrated his musical prowess was when he won piano competitions despite his note-reading handicap. It was Eddie who initially made his When Alex mastered the drums, they switched roles, but initially Alex played guitar and drums. In 1964, they formed their first band. Their final name was Mammoth, after several iterations. Eventually, they reached out to David Lee Roth about becoming the lead singer, mainly to save money on his PA system. Their bassist, Michael Anthony, joined the band in 1974 and began landing regular gigs at the famous El Indulge in Whiskey A Go-Go and Gazzarri's, two popular spots. Nothing came of his 1976 involvement with helping the band make a demo after seeing them play. After that, Warner Brothers in 1977, they were signed to a deal for 2 albums after being discovered by group producer Ted Templeman. Inspired them to record their debut album in just a matter of weeks. They were careful to record multiple takes with minimal overdubs for the recordings. They purposefully left in some imperfections to give it a more authentic live feel. Van Halen's album debuted at number 19 on the Billboard charts, a feat accomplished by relatively few rock albums. Popular tracks from the album included Runnin' with the Devil and Eddie's now iconic solo, Eruption, in which he demonstrated his innovative finger-tapping guitar technique. You Really Got Me, with their help, their debut single. In the 9 months following the album's release, Van Halen went on a world tour where they became famous for their wild live performances and even covered Black Sabbath because of David Lee Roth's outrageous performance as lead singer and Eddie's incredible guitar skills. The band returned to the studio for a brief 2-week session towards the end of 1978, which resulted in Van Halen 2 Keeps the Spirit of the Album Alive, which added depth to the band's already iconic sound and yielded their first top 10 single, Dance the Night Away, which peaked at number 15 on the Billboard Hot 100. For a few years, Van Halen didn't rest. They were constantly on the road and in the studio. With 1,980 singles, Women and Children First, and its singles, And the Cradle Will Rock, and Everybody Wants Some, they had another hit on their hands. However, by 1981, the band dynamic had begun to deteriorate. While Roth preferred more upbeat and pop-oriented music, Eddie aspired to create darker and more intricate pieces. They clashed. They were working on Fair Warning, but Eddie ultimately prevailed. Despite a slow start to sales, the album eventually sold a ton of copies. Following the success of their cover of Oh Pretty Woman, the band wasted no time releasing Diver Down to satisfy the widespread demand. It was evident that Eddie and Roth's friendship was beginning to crumble. Despite another solid run, they released a top-notch single titled 1984. In 1984, featuring singer, while David Lee Roth's Jump was their sole top 40 hit, other fissures were beginning to form beneath the surface, foreshadowing monumental shifts in their career. Following their 1984 hit singles Jump, Panama, and the aforementioned drum solo, Van Halen's relationship declined to the point where the band decided to split up. In 1985, David Lee Roth decided to pursue a solo career and left the band. He had a successful EP with Crazy from the Heat and was involved in a failed film deal. In their search for a new lead singer, Eddie Van Halen discovered Sammy Hagar, a former member of the band Montrose. Their breakthrough came with Hagar, and the band proceeded to have 4 consecutive #1 singles: 5,150, OU 812, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, and Balance. Their devoted fan base referred to this as the Hagar effect. This time it was Van Hagar. However, by 1996, issues with creative and personal control had escalated to the point that Hagar departed from the band due to his disagreement with their intentions to record new songs for a greatest hits album. Although Van Halen briefly reunited with Roth to record some songs, they ultimately replaced Roth with Gary Cherone. the lead singer of Extreme. Could you tell me about Eddie's other challenges and how they impacted his life? Just wait for the answer. Drunkenness and substance abuse by Eddie Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen battled substance abuse and alcoholism for the better part of his life. At the age of 12, he began partaking in alcohol and tobacco use. The more he drank, the more he came to believe that he needed it for everything. In 2007, after years of suffering, Eddie decided to enter rehab. He discussed his success in maintaining sobriety in an interview given in 2015, which took place in 2008. In addition to his substance abuse problems, Eddie suffered from a number of other health issues. In 1995, he was diagnosed with long-term avascular necrosis, a condition that causes damage to the bones. Frequently, his previous performances, his high-energy gymnastics routine eventually led to hip replacement surgery in 1,999 reports of Eddie's tongue cancer came soon after in the year 2000. The cancer was so severe that doctors had to remove approximately 1/3 of his tongue. However, by 2002, he had successfully beaten the disease. Eddie suspected a connection between his cancer and metal guitar picks are a constant companion of his. He confessed to heavy drug and cigarette use, but his lungs were unusually clear, leading him to suspect the metal picks. His physicians thought it was feasible. However, Eddie's health issues persisted beyond that point. His severe case of diverticulitis necessitated immediate surgical intervention in 2012. He had to scrap Van Halen's Japan tour because the recovery time was too long. The year 2019 follows that. Eddie had ended up back at the hospital. At that point, he was a 5-year resident due to throat cancer. Concurrently, his ex-wife Valerie Bettinelli announced on Instagram that he had been battling lung cancer. On October 6, 2020, Vince Van Halen passed away. He had covered 65 years of ground. He passed away after suffering a stroke at St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica. He was surrounded by his family, which included his wife Janie, son Wolfgang, he was playing drums for Van Halen back then. In addition to his brother Alex and his bandmates, his ex-wife Valerie was also present. Wolfgang broke the news to the world on social media later that day that his father had passed away. After Eddie passed away, his devotees erected monuments in Pasadena honoring him at locations meaningful to him from his childhood. In his honor, they gathered there. Guess who he's married to? Regarding Eddie Van Halen, what does her autobiography reveal? To find out, come back Enough Already, Learning to Love the Way I Am Today, the memoir written by Eddie Van Halen's wife. In a recent interview, the actress opened up about her life and shared narratives from her personal history, particularly those pertaining to her lengthy relationship with Eddie Van Halen. Despite being apart for so long, they remained bound together. According to Valerie, they maintained a close relationship even after they split up. In fact, they shared housing for a while and maintained an amicable relationship throughout. Ginny was also named by Erica. The most devastating piece of news was the person who broke the news that the musician, singer, and songwriter had passed away. Valerie was very vulnerable and honest when she spoke about their relationship. She emphasized the significance of staying connected with those you care about and how love triumphs over loss. It was evident from her words that despite everything they had been through, her feelings for Eddie remained unchanged. Along with wanting to experience genuine joy, Valerie mentioned that she had found more serenity and honesty in her life after being more open and honest. Truthfulness has always been one of Val's hallmarks. Regarding her private life, she recently made an emotional appearance on the radio show of QFM 96 to discuss her new book, Enough Already, Learning to Love the Way I Am Today. In this deeply moving interview, she shared stories from her life, her relationship with Eddie, and the lessons she has learned about love, loss, and self-acceptance. What really made the discussion worthwhile was her account of her time with Eddie Van Halen. The dissolution of their marriage was due to more than just Valerie made it plain 20 years ago that their bond was deeper than romantic love. According to her, the friendship and respect that paved the way for their evolving relationship remained constant. She clarified that their breakup did not spell the end of their relationship, but rather the beginning of a fresh chapter in their shared life. Even stranger was the fact that the divorce did not escalate into a disastrous legal battle. They opted out of going to court. Instead, they sought the advice of a counselor in an effort to spare their only child, Walt, any unnecessary stress. They continued living together as roommates after their breakup. According to Valerie, Eddie hoped that she could move into the new house she had purchased, close enough to Wolfgang to ensure his safety and that their family could remain united. Their deep affection and concern for one another was evident. Even after they broke up, they continued to feel that way about one another. At the outset of their breakup, Valerie acknowledged that Eddie had anger issues, as is common for individuals whose relationships have ended for an extended period of time. Nonetheless, they managed to overcome it, and their mutual regard and affection brought them closer once more. They remained close from that point until Eddie passed away in October 2020. Even though their lives changed drastically, the bond between them remained strong. It persisted even after all these years of getting along well and going on adventures together. When questioned about Eddie's second wife, Janie, and her potential, Valerie expressed uncertainty regarding her statement. Rumor has it that Janie returned to be by Eddie's side in his final moments after having moved out a few years prior to his death. It was clear from Valerie's reflections on this period of Eddie's life that she had a firm grasp on the complexities of relationships. Someone brought up the fact that love isn't always cut and dried. It can evolve and endure in ways we don't always anticipate. Despite the fact that Eddie's connection with Janie wasn't always crystal clear, Valerie still admired it. They remained close even after their 2002 breakup and 2007 divorce, which she helped explain by outlining the events of their relationship. After that, Eddie rekindled his love life and wed Janie in 2009. Similarly, Valerie wed Tom Vitale in 2011 after finding love. Despite the fact that Valerie and Eddie were so close that their chemistry persisted even though they were in other relationships. In his final moments, what did Eddie accomplish? Here we go, so be patient. In her most recent interviews and book, Valerie Bertinelli was even more forthright and honest about her personal life, particularly when discussing Eddie Van Halen. This candor was especially evident in their last moments together. Regarding her relationship with Eddie Van Halen and the challenges she faced in her marriage to Tom Vitale. Despite moving on and getting married, Valerie warned Tom that things weren't as wonderful as they appeared. She was forthright about the issues in her relationship when she filed for divorce in November 2021. Her willingness to be so forthright and honest is what gives her new book its power. Their child is called. Wolfgang were present during his passing. In her last words to Eddie, she writes, "They said, 'I love you.'" That brief but profound statement remains dear to Valerie's heart. To her, it symbolizes their inseparable bond and the fact that they would remain linked even after death. Love doesn't necessarily terminate with a person's death, as Valerie discussed in her book. It lingers in ways we might not anticipate. In her talks about love, she touched on the topic of how it can endure, evolve, and shock us long after we believe we've said our goodbyes. This keeps popping up in her story as she reflects on her relationships with Tom and Eddie and how she finally learned to love herself. Eddie Van Halen is widely recognized as one of the most influential guitarists of all time. However, for Valerie and Wolfgang, he left behind something more intimate, an indelible impression on their hearts. Central to her work is accepting herself imperfectly is something Valerie struggles with. She wishes for others to embrace the ugliness and complexity of love and life by sharing her story. No matter how bad a closure is, Valerie sees it as merely the beginning of something better, a chance to experience love, growth, and new knowledge. The significance of perseverance in the face of adversity is highlighted by her story. As one of her conversations came to a close, Valerie shared the ways in which her life had transformed. Unexpected events do occur. Even when things don't work out the way you expected, you can still find joy. Her writing reflects the wisdom she has gained from a life that has been full of ups and downs. Despite suffering the loss of loved ones and a broken heart, she has discovered ways to persevere and become stronger. She has decided to embrace every twist and turn as she embarks on a new chapter in her life. As she moves forward, she is certain that she will reach her destiny. Acceptance of herself is still a distant goal for Valerie. The story isn't merely about enduring hardship, it is also about overcoming it. Despite the worst of times, she assures us that we are capable of rescuing our own messy, lovely lives. She hopes we can find strength, improve, and accept ourselves as we are. Eddie Van Halen's wife, Val Bettinelli, finally spoke out following his death with a moving post. Her words were, "This feature will soon be available." After Valerie Bettinelli, Eddie Van Halen's wife, passes away, she speaks out. A highly personal Instagram post concerning Valerie Bettinelli's late ex-husband, Eddie Van Halen, was made a few days ago. How heartfelt and genuine. After viewing a TV show with their son Wolfgang Van Halen, who discussed Eddie's illustrious musical career, she felt compelled to write the post. However, Valerie repeatedly hit the stop button while trying to watch the movie, witnessing how it sparked she couldn't process all of her thoughts, good and bad, at once. The memories of her troubled romance with Eddie flooded back. Their relationship impacted her life for a long time, even after they split up. For over 20 years, Val and Eddie were a couple. His notoriety as guitarist for Van Halen thrust their relationship into the spotlight from the moment they were married in 1981. As Valerie admitted, there was a time when she thought Eddie was the one. Things got harder for her over time, and she realized that wasn't true. Their marriage had numerous issues. Eddie's infidelity and drug usage caused significant strain on their marriage. Their marriage ended in 2001, but they didn't officially separate until 2007, and it's never easy to admit when things are broken. According to Valerie, it was hard to face the cracks in their marriage. In a summary, they remained friends despite the fact that their feelings for one another had faded. After Eddie passed away in 2020 from throat cancer, Valerie was devastated. Despite the fact that they hadn't been in a committed relationship for 20 years, she confided in him that she felt somewhat bereft. It was difficult to feel since they were still involved, even though she was no longer his wife. They had a lot in common, particularly with their son, Wolfgang. It broke her heart when he passed away. She couldn't help but recall the moments they had shared. Seeing Wolfgang, who was singing about his dad's legacy behind the music, made her reconsider her role as the bad guy in the family, including more than simply Eddie's ideas. Their current lives are a direct result of her decisions throughout the years, she realized. Even though she knew it was necessary, Valerie said it was difficult for her to confront all of these emotions. Even though it wasn't always easy, she said that being on the show was therapeutic for Wolfgang. It was difficult, he said, but he was grateful that people had come to celebrate his father's life, to keep in mind specific details. Despite Eddie's physical absence, Valerie told him that she was touched by Wolfgang's candor and that it made her reflect on how his influence had persisted in their lives. Their history and their present were intertwined through Wolfgang. He was the constant reminder of their love for one another. In addition, she discussed the events leading up to Eddie's death. They accompanied him to the hospital, performing all necessary actions to alleviate his discomfort during his final moments. They did their best to maintain business as usual. Whenever they wanted to hang out, they'd bring Eddie pizza and tacos, two of his favorite foods. Having a meal together was one of the small things that helped get through those tough days. Despite Eddie's deteriorating health, Valerie said that they treasured his last days by concentrating on the small things that brought him joy. Turned down. When Valerie reflected on their bond, she couldn't help but question the unexplainable longevity of love. She still loved Eddie very much after they broke up. They loved each other, not romantically, but in a together sense. Often, Valerie brought up how much she adored Eddie for being so forthright about his emotions. The sincerity with which Eddie shared his final moments with her left an indelible impression on her. The fact that he told Valerie he loved her without hesitation is something she will never forget. Where does their son stand? Wolfgang, how are you feeling amidst of these tragic events? Here we go. The challenging journey that Wolfgang Van Halen is on in continuing his father's work is well documented. Wolfgang has felt the blessing and the curse of being the son of the renowned Eddie Van Halen. The name Van Halen had great significance in his family's history when he was born. Even at an early age, Wolfgang felt the pressure to meet the lofty expectations set by his renowned father. Nothing to do with his father. Though he views himself more as a doting father, the outside world views him as a rock star. Wolfgang was devastated in 2020 when Eddie passed away. Because of his dad's renown and the closeness they shared, his loss hit close to home. Wolfgang has always felt a complex web of emotions, love, respect, and pain connected to his father's music career. He became a member of Van Halen at the tender age of 15, filling in for Michael Anthony in the role of band bassist. As a father and son duo, he and Eddie thoroughly enjoyed playing side by side. Although Wolfgang's arrival was met with mixed reactions, the increased spotlight on Eddie's son Wolfgang divided fans. Some thought he deserved it, while others weren't so sure. Many saw it as favoritism, but Wolfgang wasn't trying to boost his celebrity status by accepting the job. At a time when Eddie's health was deteriorating, he did it to be near his dad. The early 2000s were a rough time for Eddie. After his 2005 breakup with Valerie Bettinelli, his drug problems became even more publicized. After witnessing firsthand the difficulties his dad was facing, Wolfgang hoped that his involvement in the band would provide some relief, may be able to assist Eddie in maintaining stability. Wolfgang, at the tender age of 15, attempted the impossible, to keep his father stable. Afterwards, in 2007, Eddie checked into a rehabilitation center. Things appeared to be improving for a brief period. Wolfgang was still not a fan of Van Halen. The audience was quite critical. Some people thought he was too young, while others thought he was just trying to emulate his father. Living independently for Wolfgang agonized greatly as well. Wolfgang should have been the opening act for Van Halen's most recent comeback tour. Wow, that was quite an experience. Everyone in Eddie's family was anticipating that, especially him. But that was not the intended outcome. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, Eddie was unable to return to Germany for further treatment as his health continued to deteriorate. There was no longer any possibility of a last-ditch reunion or final excursion. In Eddie's final years, Wolfgang had to make the difficult decision to put off the release of Mammoth WVH's debut album so that he could spend as much time as possible with his dad. The news of Eddie's death was broken to the world in October 2020 by Wolfgang. It wasn't just one person who felt the impact of the loss. While many mourned Eddie's passing, Wolfgang saw it as the end of days. Distance was Wolfgang's Father theme single that came out a few months after Eddie passed away. Prior to Eddie's passing, he had penned it. This song is accompanied by Eddie's home movies. Their chemistry deserves recognition. Every time Wolfgang plays it now, he can't help but think of his dad and the void he has created in his life due to his absence. Wolfgang is an exception to that rule. Things have been tough in the social media world. Because of his appearance or the music he composes, he has been the target of cruel comments from internet trolls who have brought him nothing but misery, strain on his sense of well-being. Dealing with that kind of continual criticism was even more excruciating than losing his father. During his talks, Wolfgang has opened up about his battles with anxiety and depression. One way he's dealt with things is by escaping the negative world of social media. His mental health has greatly improved, he said, since he has avoided constantly pessimistic people. For some of the hate, he has turned to music, but he knows that avoiding it entirely is the surest way to preserve his peace. Wolfgang is striking out on his own, putting his energy into his music, his loved ones, and himself. He hopes to build a path that allows him to be authentic while also paying tribute to his father's memory. Regarding Eddie's legacy and what Valerie told you, what are your thoughts? Please let us know in the box below. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. We hope you found it entertaining and informative. Please like and save the video. Keeping up with your favorite celeb news is as easy as watching the next movie on your screen. There we will meet